By the end of this video, you'll know how I turned my friend into the Scarlet Witch. This isn't Sabrina's first time playing the Scarlet Witch for us. She's actually played the Scarlet Witch a couple years back in this telekinesis tutorial, so she was excited to revisit the role. We wanted to make it look like the Scarlet Witch was levitating in this shot, so we had her sit on a podium. Nico shot on a wider lens to capture all those tracking markers in the scene to make sure we can pull a track in post. Now, if you want to create this effect yourself and you don't have a big green screen, that's totally fine. Honestly, we could have gone away with the shot completely static and done all the movement in post. We've actually done this once before and it worked out really well. After looking at a bunch of Scarlet Witch references, we realized that we need a nice overhead red light, so we placed some red filters on our overhead light and did our best to make sure that red light did not spill onto her face. Sometimes king hair, especially light hair, could be a little tricky for me, but with this shot it was actually extremely easy because the hair is so red from that overhead light. We're able to isolate those red strands using the shift channels effect and then crunch down the reds just slightly with the curves. And that way we're able to isolate those very thin, soft strands of hair. Luckily, After Effects Tracker was able to pull off a track. We have had failures on this before, so I was very happy to see that it actually worked. We could have used more tracking markers on the floor, but we were able to find a target that aligned pretty nicely. Using that target, we were able to create a solid. It wasn't perfectly flat, so we did a little rotation to get it to sit perfectly flat. Using a grid effect can help you achieve this. Then all we had to do was slide that solid under our podium. Then we were able to normalize the scene around that solid. Normalizing the scene just means we are defining the world center, the world axis, so any object or layer that we add to the scene is going to appear right there. Normalizing the scene also means that we're getting the axis to be the way that we wanted, so when you add objects or layers to your scene, they're not pointing or facing weird directions. There are a few ways to normalize your scene in After Effects. You can do it manually if you want to, but I suggest using a pre-existing script. The one I used is Orient World. It's a name your own price script and it comes packed with awesome features. If you're using it for After Effects, you can set your scene center to be the comp center. And if you're building it out where you know you're going to want to use it in 3D, which in this case I did, you can set your scene center to be 0, 0, 0. Now this script is an absolute lifesaver. I use it all the time. Consider throwing a couple bucks towards Mammo World and tell them ProductionCrate sent ya. So now I've got my scene tracked and normalized. I want to get it into Cinema 4D. Luckily, After Effects has this Maxon C4d Exporter, so I'm going to use that to get my scene into Cinema 4D. I built out this ancient underground library type scene using a bunch of medieval and Renaissance 3D assets from RenderCrate. To animate the book inside of Cinema 4D, I just used the bend deformer for some quick hacky animation. After getting the scene set up and the lighting roughly accurate to how it was in the studio, I exported everything out of Cinema 4D and then imported that image sequence into After Effects. You want to make sure your C4D project and your After Effects project match in frame rate, and if you're importing or exporting image sequences, make sure that those frame rates match as well. So now she's levitating, but we need some actual magic in the scene. I decided to use these aura effects from FootageCrate.com. These effects, I'm obsessed with them. They are so easy to use and to composite. They're great for anime effects, any kind of magic effects. I absolutely love them, and we're going to be adding more to the site. These are loopable and they're 60 frames per second, so I reinterpreted them at 24 frames per second, which slowed them down nicely and made them fit in the scene a bit better. I had one of the auras in front and one in back, and since they're looping, I was able to offset the one in front a little bit to make them look like two unique auras. The one in front was obscuring Scarlet Witch a little bit too much. Instead of dropping the opacity, which isn't really how emissive stuff works, I was able to use a curve to crunch out those lighter tone particulate. This left some particulate strands in front of her, but not so much that it was obscuring her. I found these really awesome dark magic effects on FootageCrate, and I knew I needed to use them in this scene, so I imported an asset and I stole the position from that original solid that we created. Now I know that dark energy ball is sitting roughly in the 3D space that we needed to, so I was able to just place it over her hand and animate it slightly over time with some position keyframes. I was able to use that same dark energy ball for her eyes. If you watch some of the Scarlet Witch reference videos, she has this red stormy look in her eyes, and these energy balls balls worked perfectly. I just drew a circular mask around the energy ball and feathered it out slightly, and then using Mocha, I was able to track her pupils. It did require a little manual position keyframing to get it to look believable, but it worked pretty well. It probably took me 15 minutes total. There's actually a ton of Scarlet Witch inspired VFX on FootageCrate, so any telekinetic power, dark energy ball, whatever you need, we have it there. Now everything's looking good, but it needs a final touch to bring it all together. So I pre-composed everything together and then created a duplicate of that pre-comp. On that duplicate, I added a shift channels effect. With shift channel selected, I chose red under the take alpha from, and now I have isolated just the red channel. Then do crunch it down a little bit further and isolate just the brighter parts of the red. I added a levels effect. Then to soften it up, I just used a Gaussian blur and cranked the amount up until it looked the way I wanted. And then for the blending mode, I just swapped that to lighten. And now I have this bloom glow effect that looks very fantastical and very magical. And that's how you can become the Scarlet Witch. If you want more magical effects or Scarlet Witch effects or any tutorials, let us know in the comments below. Later, creators.